Good evening and hello, everyone. My name is Maria Elliott. I'm an intern with the Enough Initiative. I'm graduating soon from Wayne State University with a master's in social work. My goal is to work in crisis counseling, and I am a survivor. Today, we have three guests: Amanda Gibson, who is a mother of three, a survivor, and whose dream is to work with other survivors; Sheila Shoemaker, a survivor and advocate who relocated and rebuilt her life; and Cheetara Heath, a survivor who wants to help impoverished communities. Each will tell their story and share their knowledge to help build a diverse understanding of domestic violence and build a stronger community. 1 in 3 victims of domestic violence are male. Men are reluctant to report abuse due to embarrassment. So today we're going to be discussing building resilience and overcoming trauma. Talk therapy, for example, is appropriate for victims of domestic violence with PTSD. It's often a side effect of domestic violence. When left untreated, PTSD can lead to a variety of serious symptoms, including severe depression, loneliness, anger management issues. And so early intervention and treatment is critical. Trauma can change one's demeanor and character for the rest of one's life if left untreated. So seeking treatment can help greatly after a traumatic event, giving you the chance to be the best possible version of yourself.
Okay, thank you so much, Maria. I appreciate the intro.
You're welcome.
I am Nicole Beverly. I'm the founder of the Enough Initiative and also survivor of domestic violence, stalking, and attempts by my ex-husband to hire people to kill me from prison. I have some amazing guests with us today to talk about how they overcame abuse and how they started to get involved with advocacy work. So what I'm going to do is, I know you guys are all a very big wealth of information. So I'm going to start out with one question, and I'll have each of you kind of go around. I'll say, have one of you start for each question, then we'll go in reverse. But the first question, I think it's, just if you can tell us, who were you in an abusive relationship with? And for how long were you in that relationship? Just for starters. Sheila, can you tell us first?
I can. I was actually married to my abuser for 5 years, and I met him. He was 11 years younger than me and very charming and very charismatic. And it actually shocked me that someone that much younger than me was interested in me. I had just recently lost my mom, so I was vulnerable and didn't have a very high opinion. They always catch you when you're vulnerable. And since he was so nice looking and he was so much younger and he kind of pursued me, I thought, wow, and he was so charming and kind and loving and attentive. So I was actually married to him for 5 years.
Are you with him for 5 years?
I was with him longer than that, but I was married for 5 years together, and I knew him about 7 years total.
Okay, thank you. Cheetara?
Okay, I had to unmute my mic. I'm sorry. I was married for 11 years to my ex-husband, who was also the father of my 5 children. So I was married, like I said, for 11 years in an abusive, very traumatic and abusive relationship that, like the young lady who just spoke before me, said that very mild, caring, attentive, as they usually are. And I did not know that I was getting into a very abusive relationship.
Okay. I was with my abuser for 2.5 years. We were never married. We did have a child together, and we lost that child due to the abuse. Amanda, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us like what the beginning of your relationship was like? Everything was perfect. He was sweet. He'd bring me flowers, jewelry, like just the perfect fairy tale, I would say. And then after about 3 or 4 months is when things started to go south. And what, like looking back, because you know hindsight is always 2020. Were there some red flags that maybe you didn't see early on that now looking back you can recognize? I wouldn't say that, not early on, but there was red flags that I definitely ignored once the initial abuse started. Okay, and can you give us some examples of what those were? The name calling. I was no longer allowed to see my mother when I wanted to, or if I went with my mother somewhere, I was questioned 20 different times on what we did, how we did it, who we were with, what time I was going to be gone, what time I'd get back, things like that. Okay. And Sheila, what about you? I know you mentioned that your ex was younger and very attractive. Kind of sounds like that typical Prince Charming riding in on the horse, right? And what, looking back now, can you tell us, well, first tell us how the relationship was in the very beginning and then what red flags you possibly missed when you guys were first dating?
In the beginning, it was, classic, he was Prince Charming. He said and did everything that every woman wants to hear, everything you want a man to do, flowers. He would buy small gifts. They weren't always, elaborate, but they were very thoughtful. He wanted to know everything about me, every detail. Sometimes he would even cry if I told him something that was sad. So he had the capability of faking tears, because I know now that he really didn't have any real empathy for me. It was just, he wanted to know everything about me. There were so many red flags in the beginning, but I wasn't aware of what red flags were. He love bombed me. And I fell for it hook, line, and sinker because I wasn't aware of what love bombing was. I mean, he wanted to move quickly because he loved me so much. I was just the most amazing thing in the entire world. So every red flag was there. I just wasn't aware of what red flags were. So they were all there.
Okay. And Cheetara, what was the beginning like, and were there red flags that you, looking back, missed also?
The beginning of the relationship actually started when I was in high school. I was about 16 going on 17 years old. And I met this gentleman with my cousin at the mall, going to the movies, not even thinking about boys. He followed me throughout the entire mall. He was 4 years older than me at the time. And he just came up to me and basically boasted about how beautiful I was and how he had to follow me around the mall, which I thought was very, very creepy. But at the time, kind of cute that a guy was giving me so much attention. And I was kind of snazzy with him. He asked me for my number, and I was like, no, give me your number, because I still was kind of creeped out. But I ended up calling him anyway, and it was history from there. But the red flags looking back are after we got into a relationship, who are you talking to? I was heavy into music. He didn't want me to go to the studio anymore because there were other males there. He didn't want to, like, after we got married, he didn't want to have me go to my mother's house anymore or as often. And if I did, just like our sisters here, how long were you there? What were you doing? Who came over? What exactly did you do? Those were the flags for me, the questioning, the control.
And you know, you bring up a really good point, and that we're seeing that a lot of abusive relationships are starting in high school. And we're seeing when we're going into high schools and doing surveys for students that as many as 40 to 60% of students are reporting already having been in an abusive relationship.
So I know I applaud you on taking that step, because and it is very, very much needed, because I know that had it not been for me witnessing domestic violence as a child and not understanding, the warning signs, and not understanding that, a man doing that does not love you, or just being aware and attentive to, abuse, period. I don't think that I would have even fallen for anything like that, or would have stayed in the relationship as long had I dealt with what I went through as a child.
Can each of you, and Sheila, we'll start with you this time, tell us, like, what was the final straw? What happened to make you, finally, actually, you know what? I'm going to take it a step back. Can you tell us, or give us an example of like either a typical incident of abuse and what would happen after the abuse, or the most extreme incident and what happened after? And we'll start with you, Sheila.
I guess probably the one, the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, the last 6 months that we were together, it was pretty violent. The last 48 hours before he was arrested, before the sheriff's department finally actually intervened, because I had called for help several times. They would show up, and a lot of times they wouldn't take any action at all. The last particular time on July 4th, I call it my personal Independence Day. He had a knife for the 2 days prior. He knew that he was in trouble, and he had planned on taking the knife and stabbing me in the heart in front of the police so that they would shoot and kill him. That particular morning, which was a Friday morning, I guess everything kind of broke loose, and I ended up with some broken ribs, a concussion. My eardrums were ruptured from blows to the head. And the police they responded that morning, and I was taken by ambulance to the hospital and put in protective custody. And he was found and captured by the police on July 8th. He got away that morning. They called in the helicopters and dogs, and that was the final straw for me. It didn't mean, and people often ask me, does that mean that, boom, you just stopped caring about that person? And that's not how it works, which is very hard for a lot of people to wrap their head around. It's a healing process, and it's almost like a mourning process. But that beating that morning and that escalation of violence was pretty much how that 6 months prior, that's how it was. I had 5 concussions in 6 months. I've had a gun put to my head. It was nothing for him to threaten my life. It was pretty bad. And at the time, and it sounds crazy to hear it come out of my mouth now, I didn't think it was that bad, because I'm like, well, he didn't kill me. He broke some ribs, but he didn't actually, I didn't end up in the hospital today. I was at the hospital a lot. But in your own mind, you try to rationalize, well, it wasn't that bad, or if I hadn't have said this, maybe if I'd had not done this, or if I'd have done this for him, or if I had just not said anything, if I'd kept my mouth shut, if I hadn't got angry, if I hadn't cried. So I got to the point where I was trying to rationalize what he was doing instead of making it his responsibility. That day when I was taken to the domestic violence shelter, and I sat outside and cried for hours, and the lady that worked at the shelter sat with me for a little bit, and she let me cry and told me I was going to be okay, and told me it wasn't my fault. That's when I started to realize that, hey, it's going to take me some time to heal. I started to realize that, I needed to get some help. and I had to have help. This wasn't something I was going to be able to heal from on my own. Because even when I testified in court, when I would go in the courtroom and he came in shackles, I felt guilty. Like, oh my gosh, what am I doing to him? And I look back now and I'm thinking, I look at my thought process back then thinking, what was I doing to him? I still couldn't say, what did he do to me? But now I can. I mean, now I can, but it was pretty brutal. I mean, he's not a nice person. I wouldn't treat my dog like that. And nor should any human being be treated that way. And if you love someone, you don't treat them that way. But people like him are not capable of loving someone. That's not love. It's just not love.
Absolutely. And if anyone is just joining us, this evening we're talking about the journey from victim of domestic violence to advocate. And we have some amazing guests on tonight who have been through a whole lot and now are at a point in their lives where they are giving back. And I think we just lost Cheetara, but hopefully she'll pop back in, who are now giving back and advocating and educating. So the question that I had just asked Sheila and Amanda, I'm going to pose this to you also, is what did a typical incident of abuse by your ex look like? And then what followed the incidents of abuse typically?
Our very first incident, he borrowed money and I needed it back to pay, I think, the electric bill the next day. He was sleeping. I went in and I woke him up and I knew I shouldn't have, like I was already on eggshells with him, but obviously I didn't want my electric to get shut off either. So we ended up in the hallway of my apartment and his hands were around my neck. And I don't think that anything changed after then. He never apologized. It was always my fault. And then our very last, I can't say our very last incident, the one that caused us to lose the baby, it was his go-to was choking me. Like that was just, I think that gave him the most control. And that caused my water to break. And then I delivered our child at home. After the abuse started, I think I got flowers after the big ones where we lost a child. But other than that, he never wanted to take responsibility, but none of them ever really do. But the way that I finally left is our very last fight, my son, who was 2 at the time, he stepped in between us. He tried to, and Michael, my abuser, stepped on him, and we thought that he broke his leg. So everything, it was always a whirlwind. It always started with his hands around my neck, and it always ended with name calling or things like that. And then the very last time when we lost the baby, I got flowers for that one.
Wow. That's, it's a powerful statement, right there. And I can't even, I can't imagine it because I've been through similar things, but especially after losing a child, like that is just, it had to be so painful for you. And I'm so sorry that you had to go through that.
Thank you.
Cheetara, what about you in terms of what was a typical incident of abuse and how was your ex after it happened with you?
There were multiple types of abuse with my ex-husband. This was an individual who was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia and also alcoholism. And without those 2 factors, he still was very abusive, even on medication. There are a number of, I call them traumatic events because they are that, where I was shot at, I was choked in the air, I was taken out of the bed, I was asleep. And I don't know why this particular incident is very touchy, but I was asleep. And I literally was snatched out of the bed by my 2 legs, and thrown across the room to the dresser. And then had the mattress flipped on top of me, jumping on me, kicking me, took all of my glasses, broke my glasses. I can't see at all without my glasses. Just basically beat me up really, really bad. I would have bruises when I go to worship. No one really helped, no matter what I did, no matter how many times the police was called. But every time afterwards, you know, even after the abuse spilled over into my children, there would be apologies, but never any responsibility taken. There would always be, well, you know how I am, you know what makes me upset. You know, you're always made to feel as if it's your fault in some way. And that's the mind game.
Absolutely. And I know someone had just commented, Angelica, that abusers never take responsibility. They always blame their behavior to the victims. And that is so true. And him saying that to you, well, you know how I am, you know what not to do to upset me and trigger me. You know, it's such a common thing that we hear victims, you know, as they're quoting their abusers or things that their abusers typically say to them. That is such a common thing. It's always our fault. And they're so good at gaslighting us and making us believe that that's true. And it's hard for people who've never lived this experience to understand how good they are at manipulating us and playing those mind games and really and truly getting us to believe that somehow maybe we are responsible and second guessing ourselves. And Cheetara, you brought the example up of when you were sleeping. Like, my gosh, how traumatic. I mean, you were asleep. I mean, and people often ask me, and I'm curious to know if they ask you guys this too, but people who don't have the knowledge or maybe haven't been through this will always say to me, well, what did you do? Were you cheating on him? Were you, were you lying about something? Did you take money? And I'm always like, no, like, it's not about what the victim did. It's about power and control over the victim. And you were asleep. You did nothing. And how traumatic, and this happens to victims all the time, and why so many of us have, Sheila, insomnia. We'll be up at 4 a.m, texting or on Facebook because it impacts so many different areas of our life. And I know that you guys aren't a stranger to that. But it's just so important, like, as we're talking, for people to really have an understanding of all these little pieces to get a good context of why we stayed. I mean, these are horrible things that happened to us, but our abusers were so good at spinning it and blaming us. And then I love you and I'm going to change and I'm going to fix this, but you need to be different too. You need to stop doing this. And then maybe I'll stop beating the crap out of you. So, I mean, you guys have all brought up some really fantastic examples of how they spin the truth. And if we're an outside observer looking in, we see it completely differently. But when you're in that moment, and they're so good at manipulation, we really start to believe their lies 100%. Sheila, what was the final straw for you that made you just finally believe and not turn back?
I tell people, I'm always honest about this because, a lot of people have a process. Lucky for me, state of North Carolina stepped in and my abuser was sent to prison. Or I firmly believe I would not be here. I would be dead. So they, in that aspect, the state of North Carolina did something for me that I at the time didn't have the strength to do for myself. So him going to prison, I know 100% without a doubt saved my life. So from that point, I built strength. So realizing that when I was in counseling, while I was in protective custody, and I'm looking at the domestic violence wheel, and they look at the escalation and where they consider, dangerous points and where death is. And the counselor's looking at me and saying, "You're here. You're there. You're the case we consider. If you go back, your next step is death. If he's to get out and you go back, your next step is death." And I remember sitting when I was hiding on the side of the road, because I did get free from him that morning, and I'm hiding on the side of the road. And I'm at that point was kind of, I call agnostic, atheist. And I called 911, and I'm thinking, oh my God, my kids are going to have to identify my body, because I was afraid he was going to find me before the police did. And that's literally what was running through my head. And so I started bargaining with God. I'm like, please, please, please let the police find me before he does. That was the last straw for me. Wasn't completely the last straw. I still had some healing to do, but really sobering, because I have 3 adult children, I have grandchildren, to think that my children might have to go and identify my beaten body. And I was a hot mess that day. I looked like my face had been put through a windshield. I was covered in blood, and I didn't want to burden my kids with having to come look, or my family, my parents, my sister, people that loved and cared about me, people that actually loved and cared about me. I didn't want them to have to come look at my body like that. I didn't want them to see that. And I didn't want to see that either. That's the day I got my will to live. And I didn't have it until that moment. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of taking the only thing that I had left at that moment. And that was my right to live my life, my way, in complete freedom. And I took it back. I took it back.
Good for you. And you brought up an important point too, and this is something that some states have in place, and we're just now starting in our county to put the lethality assessments in place, which do exactly what you said. When the police respond to a domestic violence call, is they do the screening tool. They ask 13 questions that are assessing risk for lethality. And we only, Cheetara, I don't even know if you know this, we only have it right now in very, very few cities, even in Michigan, but all of Washtenaw County is going to start it. And it's a benefit for not only the officer, but more importantly, what you just said, Sheila, is that sometimes for the victim, it's the first time that they've ever really looked and seen how likely they are to be killed by their abuser. And it can be a huge wake-up call because we don't realize, because we're so used to this. This is an everyday thing. Like, we're not thinking about the next time this happens, we could be dead. Or if this continues to happen, we are likely to die. So hearing you say that just makes me even feel stronger about the fact that we're doing the right thing here in Washtenaw County, that was a life changer for you, and hoping that can be a life changer for other victims in our county. And eventually, once we get the statistics and and can show that it's making a difference, get it everywhere in Michigan. Amanda, do you want to go ahead next and tell us, like, what was the final straw for you in terms of leaving your abuser?
The final straw should have been when I delivered our child in our bathroom while he was being arrested. But unfortunately, I did take him back when he got out of jail. So it was about 2 weeks later, I believe, when the fight happened, to where my son, who was 2 at the time, had got between us. And when he was injuring my son, that's when I was like, I'm done. I'd already lost one child that I couldn't get back. I couldn't control that anymore, but I could save my son. And that's when I decided that I just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, very understandable. And, it's interesting. And I'm going to wait. I'm not going to say it yet till Cheetara goes. But I do want to say, Don Estes just said, too often these are so much the same story. And yeah, absolutely. Like, you hear overlap with all of our stories. There a lot of, so many differences, but also so many similarities. And then Michael Lee Chambers, I don't know who that is, but he's talking to someone up here saying, "You're so strong. I'm so proud of you for doing this and being the amazing woman you are, Sunshine." Oh, that's so sweet. All right. Cheetara, what was the final straw for you when that really just made you decide that you needed a relationship?
There's so much that could be said right now. But I would have to say that I myself began to deteriorate, both mentally and physically. And as I said before, it spilled over into my children. to the point where I was calling CPS on my own husband to protect not only my children, but myself, because the police were not responding, because no one was responding, and I didn't know what to do anymore. Leaving, if I left, he'd find me. And I was just tired. It even got to the point where he became suicidal. These attempts of suicide or threats of suicide it just became so much. The abuse, the physical abuse, and then the abuse that spilled over into my children because they needed discipline was just too much. The fact that I was deteriorating, the fact that I had found myself getting into alcoholism and not being strong enough to be there for my children and seeing them go through abuse, that was it for me. I filed my papers for divorce. I just turned into a completely different person. I was very, very gutsy. I had the divorce papers right there in the house, and I said, I'll help you find, I even helped him find an apartment. I hope you find an apartment. You have to go. This is what's happening. I thank God that we have our lives, but I was very, very gutsy. I know that that was definitely from God, because he could have very well killed me and the children.
Absolutely. And I know several of you mentioned, this was what I was going to say before, is that I noticed pretty much all of you had someone else outside of you as your reason, right? Your children, your family. So it just makes me wonder if, people don't, abusers strategically isolate us from our families, right? They're very strategic in isolating us. So we lose those contacts, we lose those relationships, so that we feel like we don't have people to depend on. And if people are in that place where they really feel like no one cares anymore, how much harder it might be for them to really rely on that feeling of, I'm doing this for someone else, because we don't feel like we can do it for ourselves, right? We often need to feel like we're doing it for someone else. And for me, it was the same. I left for my kids too. When I realized that I was trying to figure out how to get to the gun before my ex-husband did the next time, he came to harm me, and I knew I was going to end up in prison and my kids weren't going to have a parent. That same reason I left, for them, not for me. And I think it's important for us to, really look at, for victims who don't have other people outside, like, and this is the reason we all left, was for someone else, not necessarily for ourselves. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting observation. We're getting some more comments. So Don saying, hi, Nicole, and you beautiful, strong women. We must never give up the fight to share your stories with the world. Domestic violence is a huge problem that we must talk about. So proud of your strength. Good job. We are Team Tina. If you want to join our family and get laws passed. Yes, thank you, Don. I appreciate that. And we appreciate all the advocacy work that you and your crew do for domestic violence and trying to change laws and awareness also. And then we have Lori Wicker. Sheila, you are an inspiration. You have helped Amanda to move mountains. Thank you for being that angel she needed. Amanda, I'm so proud of you. Your journey has been long and hard. You've overcome so much. I wish as your mama, I would have done more. Stay strong and positive. You're changing lives. And Lori, it is, that comment that you wish you would have done more. I know probably a lot of our family members feel that way. And I was a master. I don't know about you guys. I was a master at hiding what was going on behind closed doors. So my family and friends had no idea what was happening. And they still feel guilty because they didn't know, but I was great. Like, I had a story for every mark or bruise. Like, I hid it so well. And I don't know if you guys also did that. And I'm glad your mom brought that up, Amanda. But Cheetara, I'm going to start with you. Did you hide it well?
Yes, I hid it very well. there was always, as you said, a perfect excuse for where this bruise came from or what happened. It was, I would say, out of fear and also expectation of another abusive account. And also just, I guess, out of fear that it would get worse. But yes, there was always a perfect excuse for the abuse or the abuser.
Oops. I'm not sure if you guys often ask me too, like, well, where was your family? Why didn't someone step in? Why didn't they kill him? Why didn't they shoot him? You know, and I'm like, well, number one, I hid it really well. But number two, if they had done that, then that person would have been in prison for the rest of their lives. And I would never want anyone to, you know, to have that responsibility or have that burden for me. But I think people forget, like, it's very easy to say that, right? Like, of course, like, who wouldn't, you know, that would be wonderful. The problem just disappears. But there's always, you know, a huge consequence. And I know none of us would want our loved ones, our family members, to be incarcerated for the rest of their lives trying to protect us. Sheila, what about you? Did you do a good job of hiding what was happening behind closed doors?
I did. I mean, I hid a lot of stuff, obviously, and I know that my dad, especially at one point after everything was said and done, my dad said, "I wish I would have known. I would have just killed him." And to hear my daddy say that, I'm like, wow. Well, first of all, I'm glad you didn't, because he said I would have went to prison, but you would have been safe. At the end of the day, I am safe now, and I mean, he knows that. You know, I'm safe now. And my dad's not in prison. But yeah, a lot of the times I hid it because, you know, if he would tell me, I mean, I remember one night my brother was right in the same house with me. My niece is in the next room, and he had a box knife, and he was injuring me, and I'm in the very next room for my niece, and he said, "Go ahead, scream, wake your brother up. I'll cut everybody in this house." And I knew he meant it. So sometimes I didn't scream out for help, or I didn't say things because I was fearful that they would be hurt. So I didn't want them to be injured. So a lot of times we hide things, not just to, you know, to protect ourselves, but to protect our family, fear of them being injured. And let's face it, sometimes it's embarrassing. You don't want to tell people, you know, I'm not the kind of person, when people found out, they were like, "Oh my gosh, that happened to you?" Because I'm pretty vocal. They were shocked. So it's not something I wanted to advertise. I felt like it demeaned my whole being of who I am, and who people thought, the thought of, you know, who they thought I was, you know, what they thought, the kind of person they thought I was. Somehow it made me less of a person if I admitted what was going on behind closed doors. And in reality, it didn't. So there's so many things that what happens with abuse, that it changes your very psyche, you know, so it's a whole culmination of things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Amanda, what about you? Did you, you know, your mom, you know, brought up that she wished she would have done more, which is, you know, probably really hard for you to hear, because it's hard for me to hear when my family says things like that to me. But were you good at hiding it and not letting people know what was happening behind closed doors?
First of all, my mom did everything that she could. And there wasn't anything that she could have done or said then that would have made me leave any quicker, because he had so much control over me. I was able to come up with stories on a whim on why I had a bruise here, here, here. And like Sheila said, I felt like less of a person because I allowed somebody else to take that much control over my life. And I'm not a quiet person. I'm not somebody that just sits back and lets something happen. And for whatever reason, I did with him. And I have no idea why. I think about that now, wondering how I let somebody else take so much control over me. But yeah, I hid everything. And my mom knew I was lying. Like, she wasn't dumb. She knew everything that was going on, but I still lied right to her face about it.
I'm honestly so glad that this came up too. And that's why I love just having these open conversations, so that things just kind of flow. But you guys brought up such a good point. Like, I mean, I don't know you well, but I do know Sheila and Cheetara better. And everyone knows that I have a really, like, I'm very outspoken and I have a very strong personality, and I know just a little, just tiny. And Cheetara and Sheila, I know you do also. And Amanda, you're saying you do. So I think it's so important for people to realize that this can happen to anyone, no matter how strong, how educated, how outspoken, income, race, religion, it does not matter. It can truly, in fact, people always think, oh, I would never become a victim. And I always say, had you told me this in high school, I would have been like, there is no way I would end up being a victim of domestic violence. And I always tell the kids that when I'm speaking, because I was strong, I was out to save the world. I'm this, advocate. I was looking at going to law school, I became a social worker. And before you know it, once you enter this relationship with an abuser, they are so good at what they do. And they break you down so strategically and in such subtle ways in the beginning that you just suddenly wake up one day and you're like, what happened? How did this happen to me? Like this strong, outspoken person. And I think it's so important that you guys are all saying the same thing. So people don't feel like this can only happen to meek and mild people, who are afraid or won't speak up for themselves. And I've heard some people even believe that sometimes abusers target strong people because it gives them more enjoyment or a bigger sense of victory if they're able to break down and assert power and control over a strong person. So it's very interesting as we're talking about this to hear all of you say that, because it's so true. And some of the strongest, most intelligent, amazing, and I was going to say women, but people that I know have been victims and overcome abuse. So, I think it's, in terms of just classifying and stereotyping, it's so important that we talk about this, that it truly can happen to anyone, especially our young people who think that they're invincible, right? And knowing that they need to know the red flags so that they can see it coming before they end up in any of our shoes, because we clearly did not see it coming. Shauna Vincent is saying, so much respect for you women. I often wonder why we weren't a good enough reason to be saved from our monster growing up. So yeah. So she's speaking from a child's perspective. And Shauna, I'm glad you brought that up, because we are going to be covering that topic. I think in 2 weeks, from a child's perspective, growing up in a household where it's happening. And when parents, and sometimes a parent doesn't have the strength to leave. They don't have the resources to leave. And the child is then stuck in this situation where they're growing up in a household where abuse is occurring. And there's a lot of, feelings. And I even worried about that with my kids. And you guys, can talk about that too. But after leaving, like, did I leave soon enough? How much damage was done? All the statistics show us that kids who witness domestic violence are much higher at risk for becoming either an abuser or a victim. And all those worries that all of us probably have for our kids witnessing abuse. But that's a really hard question. And Shauna, I don't think it had nothing to do with you. It had everything to do with your mother or father's abuser and the power and control that they held over your parent, and them not having the resources or the help probably to leave that relationship. It's no reflection of you or your worth. So please understand that, because all of us loved our children, even when we were in the heart of getting the crap beaten out of us and being emotionally abused. We still loved our children. But it's a wicked cycle, and it's really hard to understand, I know. Do any of you guys want to comment to that? Because that is pretty powerful, coming from someone who was growing up in a household where abuse was occurring.
I mean, I know that I always look at this and I watch what you're doing with educating children. And I know in our school systems, we teach them, we have a sex education class, but I think that we fall short when we don't teach them about boundaries and healthy relationships. I was in my 40s when I got involved in an abusive relationship, and that's unfortunate. But even at that age, I didn't know what the signs of I didn't know what red flags were. No one ever told me. Had I been taught that, maybe I could have been saved that, that experience. So if we're going to teach our children sex education, I think that right along with it, we need to teach them about red flags, boundaries, health relationships. That is a must in what you're doing. I mean, people keep saying domestic violence is growing. I'm watching the banner at the bottom, 1 in 3 women. 2 years ago, it was 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men. But if you look at it, the statistics are showing it's growing. Why? Because you've got children that are raised in homes that are like that. The children raised in a home of domestic violence, the girls and the boys are 3 to 4 times more likely to be a victim or an abuser. So it's a cycle. It's an epidemic, and it's growing. We have a pandemic. They shut the economy down. This is far more. This is spreading faster than COVID, but yet no one's wanting to do anything about it. We need to teach our children healthy boundaries. We need to teach them about red flags. We need to stop telling our little girls when the little boy at school hits them, it's because he likes her. We need to educate our children. That's how you combat domestic violence. You start when they're younger. We need to stop acting like it's a dirty secret and not to be spoke about. We need to talk about it with young men and young girls at a younger age so they're aware of it. That's how we stop this. That's how we defeat domestic violence. That's how we stop it. In 2 more years, it's going to be 1 in 2 women, and it's going to be 1 in 4 men. We stop it by getting them when they're younger. Children form their language. When you teach a child a second language, you don't teach them when they're 40. I mean, I can't learn a second language. We're going to go with I'm 40. It would be harder to teach that second language to me now. Don't choke on your coffee, Nicole. But if you taught it to me when I was 7, 10, 15, it would be much more well received because my brain would be more well received to it. Don't teach it to me when I'm 40, when I'm 50. Teach it to me when I'm young enough to when it sinks in, when it's going to matter before I get into the relationships, like what you're doing with the Enough Initiative. We need that everywhere.
Cheetara, were you gonna say something? I saw you it looked like you wanted to say something about.
I have so much stuff to say. So much going through my head right now. There is so many things that need to be done and put into play for domestic violence awareness and advocacy. I just wanted to comment really quick about how powerful the effects of abuse and the trauma that goes along with that can go from childhood. The reason why we need intervention is here's a great example. I'm going to use myself. I witnessed abuse from childhood, and it spilled over into adulthood, into my relationships. When I say that abuse not only goes, it's not only physical, there's also mental, but there's an internal mental effect that happens. I literally went from this very vibrant, healthy, energetic person to a very quiet, sick, closed, sheltered person, to the point where I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And even after I left my abuser, suffered from the effects of what I believe to be, what the doctors believe to be MS. But after going into the hospital from having what was built to be believed as MS exacerbations, was pure stress. I was told that I was misdiagnosed with multiple sclerosis and that I in fact had conversion disorder, which is a mental disorder that you develop from experiencing extreme trauma and stress. So if we can intervene at childhood, that would do a great deal, being that we would be able to recognize those red flags, be able to combat domestic violence across the board. I support the Enough Initiative and everything that you're trying to do. I really, really do. Thank
And
you.
I appreciate that. I think this is just such a powerful conversation that we're having right now. And I just wanted to point out, Dave did say, what a stellar message y'all are sharing. Bravo. Thank you, Dave. And Dave's going to be joining us on the 25th, I believe, to talk about men who have experienced domestic violence, which will, I think, be really powerful. And I'm so excited to have you on, Dave, as well. So to bring us kind of back to when you left, obstacles other than your abuser and the manipulation by your abuser and trying to, you know, promise and counseling and I'm going to change. And other than that, what obstacles did you guys face as victims? I mean, Cheetara, it sounds like you were going through a lot of medical issues. I had similar issues. Mine were my back, and I was at the point of even getting nerve blocks and, you know, put in my back because I was in so much pain. And like once I left and was out of the relationship, that went away. And I think a lot of somatic issues come along with being in an abusive relationship and us holding, you know, all of that pain and trauma inside of ourselves. It's a common thing. And we don't really necessarily realize how much physical damage to our bodies that abuse does outside of just the punches and the kicks, right? In terms of the internal damage that happens when we are in these abusive relationships and living these horrible traumatic experiences, and we never know when it's going to happen next. So we're always in a constant state of alertness, a constant state of, you know, what's going to happen next. Cheetara couldn't even sleep at night because she was going to be, you know, not know when she's going to be yanked out the bed in the middle of the night. So it's a horrible way to live. And it does do so much damage to us internally when we're in those situations too. But in terms of like obstacles to leaving for you, Amanda, other than your abuser's promises, what were obstacles that you faced? Was there anything with law enforcement, housing, anything like that made it harder for you to leave?
I had my own apartment, thank goodness, at that time, so I didn't have to worry about that. My biggest thing was seeing him. Like, I seen him everywhere, and that always triggered me into other things, which then in turn I had to find ways that I can control my pain myself, which were not always healthy ways, because he controlled it for so long. That was one way, part of the control that I could take back. So that would probably be the biggest obstacle that I had, was learning healthier ways to deal with things.
Wow. And that was really powerful, because that's something that really doesn't come up that often in these conversations. You know, typically it's the police, typically it's, there was no place for me to go. So I think it's really powerful for you to bring that up. And it makes sense, right? We've just left this abusive relationship. We are looking for anything that's going to make us feel better. And there's an entire neuro component. And Sheila, you and I have talked a little bit about this in terms of abuse and the different brain chemistry and endorphins and things that are released when we're in this back and forth, good, bad, love, hate relationship. And then add on to it, I know, and I'm wondering about you guys, and we're going to have this conversation on Wednesday about traumatic brain injury too, and the role that plays in domestic violence, because what we're finding is 81% of victims of domestic violence have had at least one concussion, which then can, yeah, me too, and which then can affect our brain chemistry and us looking maybe to even outside things for coping strategies, as Amanda just mentioned. So I wasn't expecting you to say that, but thank you for saying that and being honest and transparent with us, because it's so important to realize that when we're grasping at straws when we leave, we want to heal, we just want to get better, we want to feel better. So it can definitely be an issue then if someone leaves and becomes dependent on alcohol. One of you brought that up earlier too, or drugs or prescription medications, whatever it might be that can become a crutch for us when we first leave. that's another huge obstacle. So thank you for bringing that up. Sheila, what about you? What obstacles did you face?
For me, when I was so isolated, I lived out in the middle of nowhere. So getting away from him was difficult because I didn't have access to a telephone. When I did, it was completely monitored, had to be on speakerphone. My Facebook was 100% taken over by him. Actually, my daughter, God love her, she caught on to that because he would answer people like he was me. And she got a message from him and she was like, wait a minute, there are grammatical errors in here and misspelled words. This is not my mother. So it wasn't easy for me to get away in that aspect. And then when he was finally arrested, it was purely monetarily to get out in order to leave the area. Actually, my church helped me and I rented a car and drove a car from, I flipped a coin because I was so, that's how I decided where I was going. That's 2 out of 3. Heads, Indiana, tails, Florida. And it was Indiana. Rented a car and loaded up another survivor that I had met while I was in the shelter and her baby, and drove to Indianapolis, Indiana, and rented a hotel by the week and took the first job I could get, took the bus across town every day to go to work until I could save up enough money to get into an apartment because the resources to relocate were just not there for me. And staying in that small town area where I lived at in North Carolina was not an option because even from prison, he could keep track of me. So those were my obstacles. So I had to improvise to get around them, but I did it. Obviously, I'm doing great now, but.
You are, and we're finding, and anyone who followed our page and seeing us trying to get victims to safety, it's still a huge issue. It's a huge issue. There's not relocation funding. The shelters are full, especially with COVID happening right now, and people who have been able to escape their abusive households. Now, we had a survivor in a state on the west side who was actually given parking lots, a list of parking lots, and what nights she and her children could sleep in their car as their resource for leaving. And that absolutely broke my heart because as a mother, the last thing I'm going to do is go into a parking lot and advertise to protective services and the police that I'm homeless and living in my car with my children. But that was what she was given, a list of parking lots where they could have a good night's sleep with a security guard present, which absolutely breaks my heart. But this continues. We are in 2020 and we still do not have enough shelter beds for victims of domestic violence and their children. And it is the leading cause of homelessness in our country. It is the leading cause of trauma in children in our country. And yet, and I'll get off my soapbox in a minute, but yet we do not have the financial commitment from our government to make a change, to make a difference, to protect women and children in our country. But we have no problem feeding millions of dollars into the military and millions of dollars into other things. And again, we can talk about what money is actually going to direct service versus salaries of organizations that don't provide direct services in our country. It's a huge issue that all of us know about. I see you guys clapping. It's a huge problem. And people don't know. If you're not aware, you don't know. You think you're writing a check and it's going to help victims, when in fact, in many cases, it's not. And we still have victims across our country who have no place to go, no bed to sleep in, and they're going to end up right back in the houses with their abusers, getting the crap beat out of them, and their children witnessing it, observing it, and then the cycle goes on and on and on because they're learning the same behavior. So I will get off my soapbox now and take a step back. But I do want to ask you guys about your advocacy work, because all of you have, overcome your abuse and you're all doing amazing things now. And we know that it's not just like you wake up one day and you're ready, to do this work and become an advocate. So if you can kind of share a little bit, like what things did you do to really boost your recovery? and get to the point where you started to do advocacy work. And Cheetara, I'm going to start with you on this one.
So that day that I found out that I had been misdiagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and that had in fact been a direct effect of my abuse and trauma, my psychiatrist was here and my neurologist was here on the side of me. And they said, you have to get your life back. It's time for you to deal with the things that you've been through and get your life back. So from that point forward, that was August of 2017, I started the nonprofit organization Rebirth. Right now, we have a focus on breaking generational barriers within underprivileged communities. I have a project going on right now. We got into community and economic development, and I have 2 multifamily properties that we purchased that are going to be designated to house domestic violence victims. I'll have an emergency shelter and also a transitional housing facility as well for women with children. Our emergency shelter will also have 2 family rooms. So I'm very excited about that project because it is very, 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 very dear to me and very needed across the board.
Absolutely. I'm excited to work on that with you and be involved in whatever, way that the Enough Initiative can be involved. Were there certain things that you found really helpful as you were recovering, Cheetara? Just was it specific counseling? Were there exercises that you did for yourself? Was it pushing yourself? What was the most helpful for you when you were transitioning to advocate?
I would say the biggest thing that helped me is the same thing that I encourage the ladies through my Women in Rebirth program, and that is to become community leaders, to become advocates in their community. It is a healing to be able to go into the community and make change. I think the biggest thing for me is to make sure that I'm doing whatever I possibly can to make sure that no one has to go through this ever again. And as long as I keep that motivation, I know that success will be made.
And I know it's true because I can already feel you. I know your energy and your heart, and it's going to be amazing. I can't wait.
Thank you.
Sheila, what about you? What was the most helpful for you in overcoming and next step from being in victim mode to survivor mode to advocate mode? And I know this is a really big question. If you can kind of think about the things that were the most helpful for you along the way, just so that people can have some ideas of maybe who have just left and don't know what to do and they're kind of stuck. What recommendations or suggestions do you have?
I reached out. I found a Facebook group. That's how I started, by talking to other survivors. And then I realized, wait a minute, they get me, they get it. And that's how I started my healing process, was by talking to other people. I can talk to my friends, I can talk to my family, but I get that, why didn't you leave? Or that my favorite question, what did you do? And I don't think people mean harm by that, but they don't get it. And in 2017, I went through a program with 4 other survivors. It was an online program, and it was a financial program. I have a degree in accounting, and I had to go and relearn my self-confidence on how to budget my money because I was so down in the dirt. I had a GPA of 3.85. So it's not like I'm not ignorant of finances, but I had to relearn that. I had to relearn my self-confidence and networking with these women. And then I went to a survivor's retreat, and I went with these 48 other women, and I sat in a room with all these amazing women and realized they all went through what I went through. The stories varied. And I thought, wow, these people are phenomenal. They're the most amazing And I wanted to be just like them. And I was like, wait a minute, I am just like them. I'm just like every woman in this room. And I can be effective and I can go out and make change myself. That year, the program that I went through the year before, I coordinated for that same nonprofit. And I got to help select survivors that got through, and they got to go through that same training program. And that is how I met Amanda. And then Amanda and I are currently working on a project together, and we're getting ready to start something similar to what we went through. Only we're going to do it in a retreat style, because I really felt like meeting all those other women face to face and being able to, to talk to them and to share stories and realize that I'm not in this alone. That was the most healing point for me. And it gave me the confidence to get out there and start talking to other survivors to let them know you're not alone. I understand you. I get it. And that we're all together. All of us together, we're strong. There's an army of us out there. And if we all get together, we can make a difference and we can make a change. We can't do it by ourselves. There's more of us than there are there are more of us than there are abusers. And together we can make a difference. We're powerful. We're strong. We have a voice, and we need to stand up and be loud and proud and get out there and make a difference. Well, let's get out there and kick domestic violence butt. Let's show who's boss. And it's us. I mean, we're phenomenal. That's where I got my voice at. Other survivors, they motivate me. You guys are amazing. And especially you, because, I've been like following you for years, Nicole. You're phenomenal. And I thank you. I mean, you're phenomenal. The stuff you've done in Michigan, I mean, you took on the state and you kicked their butt. I mean, you made a difference. You showed us we can stand up.
We have some more butt kicking to do
As
here.
I know, I'm going to watch.
Clearly, we have a lot more, but we're not done. We're gonna keep kicking butt, because we have a lot more work to do.
Yep.
Appreciate that. And the retreat, and Amanda, I'll have you go in just a second, but I agree. Like, I went to a retreat also, and that's something that I have already talked to you guys about being involved with when we do ours for the Enough Initiative. It's just so powerful. And Angelica is saying I had very low self-esteem, suffered from CPTSD, triggers, flashbacks. I think she was talking about like why, in the beginning, what she was going through when she first left. But I agree. It's so powerful to be in an environment or in a group with other people who have experienced the same thing. And what I found, and we joke about it, but I'm going to do it someday. My second book is going to be the Abuser's Handbook, because they all say the same things. They do the same things, same strategies. It's like going to be all their tricks in a book, because hearing every other victim or survivor in that retreat, it was like the same comments, the same words, the same behavior. It was crazy to hear how similar they all were, and the way that they broke us down and held us down and kept us down, that it was powerful for me too. And it also made me feel, not as stupid, not as, vulnerable, not as like, if it could happen to her, and it, and it clearly happened to me, it definitely helps give me strength and feel like, okay, this truly could happen to anyone, which we've already talked about. 100% it can happen to anyone. Okay, Amanda, what about you? In terms of, your journey and what things you're working on now, and what helped you make the leap from victim to survivor to advocate?
So I went through the same programs that Sheila went through, and that was about 10 years after I left my abuser. But I don't think that I truly healed until I met Sheila and went through the program. Like, I was able to call her. Unfortunately, my first abuser 12 years ago has not been my only one. And I was going through a divorce at the time from my last abuser when I met Sheila and was going through the financial program. So that was probably like my kickstart into it. And then I think it was March of this year, I went to the retreat. And that was a huge like switch for me. A few months ago, I messaged Sheila and I'm like, I want to do something. We need to do something. And we have just got the ball rolling since then. And I'm really excited for the programs that we're going to start doing and being able to reach out and things like that.
Awesome. And you actually just brought up another great point that I know people hear me preach about all the time. But if we as victims don't do the work on ourselves, we are so at risk for ending up in another abusive relationship that maybe isn't the same type of abuse. Maybe it's not physical, but it's emotional or it's financial. You know, it's different, but in some way, if we don't do the self-work and find love ourselves and decide that we are never, ever, ever going to settle again for someone who abuses us in any way, shape, or form, we are at risk for jumping into another abusive relationship. And if we are still feeling broken, we are vulnerable, and we set out this beacon to the abusers of the world that this person is a vulnerable person, and, you know, target them. So, you know, it's so important. And I think the retreats and what you guys are talking about doing, and all three of you really is rebuilding, right? Teaching people the skills to be a survivor, the financial skills, giving them a safe place to stay, helping them rebuild emotionally is so crucial, because I see it over and over and over again. People leave, they don't do the work on themselves to really fully empower themselves, and then they're in another abusive relationship. Might be a different type of abusive relationship, but I see it so often, and I know people get tired of hearing me say, take a break from dating, you know, don't date until you work on yourself. But we have to find happiness within ourselves first before we can find happiness with anyone else in a safe and healthy way. I'm just looking at some more comments real quick. I know we're over. I always go over. It's shocking, isn't it? Michael Lee is saying survivor key, our first key to freedom. Absolutely stunning, ladies. Just jaw dropping and truly inspiring. It's very sweet. And Angelica just said, we survivors can be victim strength. Absolutely. Angelica, I totally agree. Like, people just hearing our stories, us being vulnerable, talking about our experience, and helping people see that we've overcome the hell we've been through, because we've all been through hell, clearly, you know, and I know what you guys have shared tonight is just a tiny piece and probably a tip of the iceberg of the hell that you have all been through and survived. And to see you here tonight and how strong and amazing and beautiful and intelligent and inspiring you are. You guys give strength to victims who are either still in an abusive relationship or maybe have just left an abusive relationship, and knowing and hearing your stories and knowing that they too can get to this place and overcome is probably the most powerful thing we can all be doing, is to give hope, right? So thank you so much for doing this and being vulnerable and open and honest with your stories, and sharing so that other people can see, you know, that you can overcome, you can find yourself again, you can rebuild your life. Renee just said, yes, thank you for your vulnerability and sharing with us tonight. Is there anything else that you guys really want to add, or if you had an opportunity to to speak to someone maybe who's watching tonight and is still in an abusive relationship and is maybe deciding if they should leave or not leave, what words would you share with them tonight? And Amanda, is it okay if I start with you?
Yeah, that's fine. I guess just knowing that you can do it. It's going to be hard. It's been hard for the last 12 years for me, but I've overcome so much and I've become such a stronger person, and you just have to take that first step.
Sheila?
Definitely. I mean, if you're thinking about leaving, it is a scary step. And I'm not going to kid you for 1 second and think that it's going to be an easy road. It's not. But I'm going to tell you that there are so many survivors out there that you're absolutely not going to be alone. You're never going to be alone. reach out, find a support group of other survivors. It is your safe place, judgment free. We all understand. Reach out to those people, make a plan, make a safety plan, execute it, and get out. It's worth it. It's going to be rough, but at the end of the day, you'll look back and go, wow, you'll have a life and you'll have freedom. It's worth it. I promise you. You're worthy of it. You deserve it, and you're enough. Get out. Your life is worth it. You're valuable, and you deserve to have a good life. And I beg of you, if you're in an abusive relationship, please get out. Reach out to someone, anyone, and please get out.
Thank you. And Cheetara?
I would say the exact same thing, to get out, that you are loved, you are cared about. There are other individuals like you who would love to have you, as a supportive person as well. Do everything that you can to change your situation and get out, because when you do get out, the feeling of freedom is unlike any other. It really is. So love yourself and know that you are worth it.
I totally agree. I always tell people that it's so unbelievable to go from being in this abusive relationship to finally, and it took a long time for me to even say finally, because I was stalked by my ex for 2.5 years. And so I wasn't finally free until he was finally held accountable. But once that happened, and I could just be on my own and have that freedom, and Sapphire has joined us. Sorry. Hopefully she is not going to be super obnoxious, but she had to make her appearance. That sense of freedom it's so amazing. And I tell people, like, I would rather have this sense of freedom that I have now and live in a box than live in the amazing $400,000 home that I had with my ex-husband, where I lived in hell. Truly, truly, I would trade it any day of the week. Just to be out of that darkness, that cloud constantly over me. And we struggled when we left. Like, we had nothing. We didn't have beds. We didn't have a couch. Like, everything that we got was from other people who gave to us, because, my coworkers, friends who gave a shit and gave us stuff so that we had a bed to sleep on, or, air mattresses, whatever it took. And even still being in that environment, I remember just thinking, I'm still so grateful. Even if all I had, all we have is a freaking air mattress and a 1990 TV that has the big tube, it was still heaven being out of that environment and situation. So it's so important, I think, for people to realize that there is hope, and it sucks in the beginning. It is a journey and it is work. Not saying that it's all going to be, gold and, and shining diamonds. It takes work and it sucks in the beginning, but even when it sucked, it was better than being in that environment with my abuser. And I'm sure you guys would all agree with that, because I see you're nodding. So, and Miriam saying thank you, and for amazing survivors. Thank you, Miriam. Miriam is on our board of directors at Enough. We appreciate you. And I just want to thank you guys so much for coming on tonight and being vulnerable, because I think it's so important for people to hear your stories and hear your experiences, and maybe be able to relate in a way that they couldn't before, and maybe have a deeper understanding about domestic violence. Because on the surface, people, if you haven't lived it, it's very hard to understand. But hearing you and your vulnerability and what you've shared tonight, I hope it gives somebody a better understanding who's never been in this situation, and maybe someone who's living it, hope that they too, can leave and grow and find the strength to get to the point where they're advocating too. And I agree with all of you. Advocacy work was huge for me. When I was ready, I didn't talk about what was happening. And a part of it was because I think I was still being stalked and going through all that for 2 years. I didn't talk about it. And then when I finally was fed up and angry, and I'm like, you know what? Enough is enough. And I'm going to start talking about it. And I started posting about it and sharing my story, and people had no idea and they were shocked, but they started to pay attention, people who, you know, otherwise wouldn't have, and they listened. So doing this is so important. So I thank you, all three of you, so much for being on tonight and sharing your stories, which are hard to share, but so important. Is there anything that anyone else wants to add before we close? Because I know we've been on for an hour 20, but it's been an hour and 20 of amazing and valuable information. If you have something to add, do you want to raise your hand? Okay, Amanda.
I just want to thank you for the opportunity. Without this and everything that you do, people wouldn't know that they're capable of doing it as well. So you setting that bar and letting them know that, hey, I went through all this, but I can still accomplish all of that. It gives them hope, I think. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do. I appreciate it. And it's what keeps me going. It's what, even when I'm we get shut down left and right by the state, and getting this address confidentiality bill and the lethality assessments. It's victims are truly what keeps me motivated, because all the rest doesn't matter. And if we help one person, that's all that matters. And if the powers that be aren't in a place where they can listen to us and care and help us right now, then we just have to do the work ourselves, which is sad. But as long as we continue to push and help as many people as we can, we'll continue to make that difference. So you guys are just starting, I know, but you just know it's going to suck some days and you're going to feel like throwing the towel in, but just know that if you can affect change in one person, it is all worth it. 100%. Cheetara, did you want to add anything? I wasn't sure if you put your hand up.
No, I didn't put my hand up, but I do want to say thank you as well, for sure. And thank you, ladies. You are absolutely amazing. And thank you for the work that you have taken on. And I would also like to work with you. If we could connect.
We all need to
For
work
sure.
together. And actually, I met someone at the radio show, Brandy, who we are going to connect with here in Detroit, looking at doing something really similar.
Awesome.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. You can continue to post comments, questions, if you have them, and if people will probably are gonna ask like information on survivor keys, information on rebirth, and the work that you guys are doing. Can you guys post that information in the comment section? So that if people want to go to get information or follow your Facebook page or website, whatever, that they can find it in the comment section?
We can. We started a pilot group Facebook page because we were trying to get feedback. I think probably just go ahead and make that public and start running with it.
Yeah.
We have email addresses set up, but let's just go ahead and do that route that way, because we want to get everybody's feedback before we lock down what we're going to do at our financial retreat. And we were asking other nonprofits for their opinions. That's what we were doing. What do you think would be beneficial in other survivors? And we got a lot of good.
We did.
We got a lot of good information from other people. And that's what we're looking for. Sometimes I like to think my ideas are the best, but they're not always. So
Why not?
Right? So I wanted other people's opinions too, Amanda. And I thought it would be great if we just asked other survivors, what information would you have liked to have had? So we started like a private group and we were picking a lot of people's brains and it was awesome. So probably go ahead and open that up because we're about to run with it. Thank you so much for everything you do, Nicole. You know how I feel about you. And it was very nice to meet you virtually. And I love you, Amanda. I'm so proud of you.
Love you.
Okay, so you can look in the comments, and Char, you'll post your stuff in the comments too, information about whatever you want to share. Oh, yep.
I'm not sure exactly how to do it, how to utilize StreamYard, or how to post it in the comments, because I just booted myself out and I tried to do it.
So once we're done, if you just go right into the Facebook stream,
Okay.
you can post a comment there with the information, and I'll go ahead, I'll post the enough information there too. And if you guys post whatever you want to, and then people can look and in the comment section to find more information. That'll be awesome. All right, thank you guys so much. Love you. You are amazing. Keep up the amazing work, and we will all be seeing each other very soon, I'm sure. All right, bye guys. Good night.